Holy City Center Radio, it is episode 80, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today, it's Friday, February 3rd, 2023. Hope you all had a great week. Friday. I don't know about all you, but I'm very happy to have the weekend here. My week wasn't bad by any means, but, it's just something about the weekend's a little nicer. I'm sure you understand. Before we dive into the stories, real quick, fairly quiet week. I didn't do too much, but I did attend basically like a media event, Lip Sync for Lungs event that is put on by the American Lung Association South Carolina chapter. For those who don't know, it's this really fun event that's going to be held at the Music Hall this year on the 16th. And of course, you could probably assume it's raising money for the American Lung Association, a very good organization. And what they do is they get local, quote unquote celebrities, well-known folks in the area, to, choose a song, and they do a whole performance, lip syncing. There's usually, costumes and background dancers, they go all out, and, they choose a winner and they get a trophy. And, it's this really fun event. Even if you don't know any of the people participating, I'm sure if you have a friend or something, it's like even more crazy. But I've attended a couple now, and it's always fun. But anyway, they had a media event where you kind of get to see the contestants, mingle a little bit, kind of get an idea of what this year's event's going to be like. So that was nice. And like I said, I mean, I really just wanted to bring it up to make sure I mention the event because I've, been to it a couple times. I have a friend who's heavily involved and really want it to go, continue to go well this year and into the future. It should be, and it's already well on its way of being a long-time Charleston event that I think pretty much anybody in the community can enjoy. So if you want to buy tickets, but please do. It's at the Music Hall, like I said. You can also donate. Maybe you know someone participating. You can donate directly to them, or there's just like a general donation for the event. And, again, proceeds will go to the American Lung Association. All right, with that, let's move on to the latest stories. That rascally little rodent, Punxsutawney Phil. That's right. Thursday was February 2nd, Groundhog Day. No, not the Bill Murray movie, although obviously, if you're familiar with that, you're familiar with the tradition. Punxsutawney Phil allegedly saw his shadow, which predicts 6 more weeks of winter. How dare he? I mean, I guess I can't be too mad. The weather in Charleston hasn't exactly been super wintry this year. We just had like an 80-degree day on Wednesday. That was wild. But yes, he did see a shadow. 6 more weeks of winter is what that means. All right, next up, let's talk about the Murdaugh trials, of course. As I always have to say, the caveat if something big happens on Thursday afternoon, evening, however long the trial goes, I won't have that information in this podcast, but I will add it in on Monday since I do record these while the case is still ongoing. So a lot of the last few days has centered around phone calls, phone data, everything that you could ever possibly want to know about cellular phones and towers and the data they collect. That's been a big chunk. Part of it was trying to establish a timeline, but my mind was kind of blown by some of the things that they can retrieve from people's cell phones. Where they can determine if a screen was turned, landscape mode or portrait mode. They can determine based on those movements. Oh, yeah, it looks like that person was probably lifting the phone up to do the Face ID. It's insane some of the stuff they're talking about. Yeah, a lot of it is, again, with these court cases, some of it just it gets kind of bogged down because they're asking obvious questions with obvious answers just to get things on the record, and so the jury can hear it. And so also some of this stuff can be a little tough to listen to, but thankfully, we got a pretty good recap here. I'm not going to try to dive too much into those details. If you're really interested in that stuff, by all means, go look it up. It is somewhat interesting. But in any event, part of the cell phone talk revolved around a video. A video was played at Alex Murdaugh's trial on Wednesday that included what sounds like Alex's voice at the scene of his wife and son's murders just moments before it happened. So his son took a video, and on that video it's clearly Paul who's talking. He's there's a dog, a friend's dog that he was taking care of. He was down at the kennel. He was trying to get a video of the dog because there was some kind of injury to its tail, and he was asking his friend about it. Hey, did you know your dog had this injury and whatnot? So they had that friend, his name is Rogan Gibson, come up, and he testified that he was in communication with Paul that evening, and did confirm, yep, that's my dog that was there. He said that Paul called him around 8:40 on June 7th, 2021. And he knew when he spoke to him that Paul was down in the kennels because he could hear the dogs barking in the background. The lead prosecutor, who is named Creighton Waters, then asked if Rogan had heard any other voices on the phone, and Gibson testified he heard Maggie Murdaugh, Paul's mom, and also who he thought was Alex Murdaugh. He wasn't totally sure, but they did ask, like, how certain are you that it was him? He was like 99% sure. And then when they showed the video that Paul had taken, and you could hear the voices in it, he said, "Oh, that's 100%. That's Alex's voice on there." So that testimony and the video, you can see that clip out there. It does for sure sound like Alec. He that puts him at the scene of the crime, not just on the evening, which we already knew he was supposedly at that house a couple times that evening, but it puts him right in that back area where the kennels were, and shortly before some people, investigators believe that they were killed. So that could be potentially huge. Um, all right, so some little details to go along with that. Speaking of time and all that, the video that Paul took began at 8:44 p.m. and then ended at 8:45 p.m. They even have it down to the seconds if you want to go look this stuff up. But basically, it was a 50-second clip that he took. The detective, the state law enforcement division analyst, Lieutenant Britt Dove, was testifying about these things. As I mentioned in the background, you can hear the other voices. And then this analyst was saying when they examined cell phone data from all of the Murdaughs, specifically Maggie and Paul, it indicated that activity on both of their phones stopped abruptly at 8:49. So we mentioned this a couple times. Again, going back to, they can pull so much information off these phones, so they can see when texts, what time texts went through, of course, what time calls went through, but it also they can find out like when the screen was open or if someone was on the internet, and things like that. So they had normal activity that they could see in the phone's log, and then around 8:49 p.m. all that activity stops. Of course, the thought process being they were killed around that time. Now, that means the video started at 8:44, ended at 8:45, and the deaths occurred at 8:49-ish, if not right at that time, slightly before or slightly after. That's, a time frame of 4 minutes, 5, 6, 7, even I would say up to 10, in the off chance that both Maggie and Paul did nothing on their phones for 10 minutes, including like walking. Their phones could count steps too. Uh, that and Alec is on that video. So that seems pretty damning, even though you can't see him on the video. So if anybody has doubt that that's his voice, they may not go along with it. But that certainly seems quite in favor of the prosecution. All right, some more details that they pulled from those cell phones. Maggie Murdaugh's phone, the night that she was murdered, or calls to her phone rather, appear to have been deleted from Alex Murdaugh's phone. So a state law enforcement division agent who pulled the information from both of their phones testified on Wednesday that there was a discrepancy between the phone records. And records from Maggie's phone they were first introduced on Tuesday, and they continued the talking about it on Wednesday. But those records indicated that there was 5 missed calls from her husband at 9:04, 9:06, another one at 9:06, 9:45, and then 10:03. And those are after they believe that she had passed. They believe that Alec was calling her after she had died. Now, from those records, they pulled that from Maggie's phone, but when they looked at Alex's phone, those calls were not present. They were missing from the call log. The only activity recorded at the time that we were just talking about was an unanswered call to Maggie made from Murdaugh's phone at 10:25 p.m. So it appears those calls to her phone, for whatever reason, were deleted from Alex's phone. So again, just another interesting twist. Why is her phone showing 5 missed calls from you, but your phone, they've been deleted? So definitely another interesting thing there that was pointed out by the prosecution through their witness testimony. And one last piece from the cell phone data and things that they pulled was this orientation stuff. This seems interesting to me. So at 8:49 p.m., prosecutors say Maggie's phone went silent forever. We mentioned that before. Paul's did the same, which again means that neither of them initiated any kind of activity. They didn't answer any calls, read texts, nothing. However, a few minutes later at 8:54 p.m., the phone's camera, Maggie's phone camera, activated as if it were trying to recognize a face for the facial recognition unlock. You pull the phone up, it uses the camera on the front of your phone. So that phone got activated shortly after they alleged that she was dead. So that's absolutely interesting. Did whoever the killer was try to unlock her phone or try to put it up to her face to try to unlock it for some reason, to try to remove something? Um, who knows? But that certainly is interesting to read that. But there was more. There was also an orientation change that occurred at 9:06 p.m., which is the same time that Alex Murdaugh made one of several phone calls to Maggie's phone. So at 8:54, you have someone potentially looking at the phone as if to try to unlock it, or at least oriented the phone in that manner. And then a few minutes after that, actually about 12 minutes after that, when Alec is, according to phone records, making a call, another orientation occurred. Was someone there at the scene, whether it was Alec or not, looking at the phone when that, for whatever reason? So, really, really interesting cell phone data that really, like I said, I think really favored the prosecution, particularly the video with Alex's voice on it, showing he was at the scene of the crime just minutes before they assumed that Maggie and Paul were killed. The only other real interesting piece that I felt came out was when Carleton County Sheriff's Office Sergeant Dathan Varnado testified that he administered a gunshot residue test to Alex Murdaugh's hands the night of the murders. Standard, just trying to see if he has any residue on there. And when he testified, when he was, doing this test, which involves taking swabs of Alex's hands, when he looked at his hand, he didn't see any debris, dirt, no blood, nothing on his hands. So, forget gunshot residue. His hands were so clean. But supposedly, in interviews, he talked about how he move Paul's body a little bit, how he was checking for pulses. And we've talked before about all his clothes being completely clean. Like, how did he not get any blood on his clothes? How did he not get it on his hands, especially, or dirt when he was kneeling down? It's just really interesting. So I thought that was an interesting point as well. How exactly is this dude's hands so clean if he's supposedly been doing all those things? So I think prosecution had some good points in all of this. Defense still seems to try to be honing in on, issues with procedures, or that they focused on Alec too early and are just trying to make pieces fit. But I think the prosecution had a good few days. All right, let's get out of the trial that everyone's talking about. Staying here in South Carolina, former Governor Nikki Haley is planning a February 5th launch for her 2024 White House bid. That's right. Nikki Haley is moving closer and closer to officially making the presidential campaign run that everybody's kind of assumed she'd be going on official. It's one of those like worst kept secret things. Like everybody knows you're going to run. So according to a report on Wednesday, supporters of the former South Carolina governor will get an email invitation on February 5th telling them about a launch event in Charleston, actually. So that's the other piece to this. It's supposedly going to happen here in Charleston. That email is going to announce her plans to run for president in 2024. This information was shared with the Associated Press, who reported it. They said it was a person familiar with the plans, but they weren't authorized to speak publicly about it. So February 15th, plan on it being official that Nikki Haley will be running for president. There's still rumors out there that Tim Scott, our current senator here in the state, will be doing the same at some point in time. All right, keeping it with politics, South Carolina senators on Wednesday approved a scholarships accounts program that would expand eligibility for private school tuition vouchers, is what we're talking about here. This would make these vouchers available to middle class families rather than just those who qualify for Medicaid. So the House still has to sign off on this proposal, but this is something Republicans in the state have been trying to pass for a long, long time. um, and it kind of revived, during the pandemic when schools were closing. So Republican senators made some changes on the final day of the consideration. The measure initially limited eligibility to families qualifying for Medicaid, which is usually about twice the federal government's poverty level. As I mentioned, though, middle class families were now included and would have access to 6,000 vouchers funded by public tax money. This is intended to help cover the cost of kindergarten through 12th grade private school tuition and other expenses. So basically, the voucher program would allow a certain amount of money to help if parents want their kids to go to a private school. These vouchers would do that. Typically, this was to help those in the community that, maybe wouldn't have those funds otherwise. Generally, the poorest among us, because some of those schools in those areas aren't very good either. But now it's going to include some middle class families as well. Maybe people that couldn't afford the tuition, but aren't as in such dire circumstances as others. But that's what the current legislation says. Democrats are criticizing the amendments, saying it's altering what Republicans' original purported goal of helping poor people living in impoverished districts, and maybe they're limited by an inadequate in excuse me an inadequate public school. So that's kind of what I was mentioning. That was the original intention of this, and so Dems are criticizing. Well, now you've just expanded it to all these other people who don't necessarily need it. And on top of that, Democrats said that the expanded education scholarship accounts do not serve the working class, especially when the average cost of private schools far exceeds the $6,000 that's going to be provided. So we'll see how this plays out. Like I said, it still has to be passed by the House, but this state is dominated at all governmental levels by Republicans, so I'd be surprised if it doesn't pass. But there has been some stuff that didn't go through that we thought might, when the two sides haven't agreed. So we'll see what happens there. All right. Are you tired of parking downtown? Of course you are. Everybody is, if you can even find it. But more importantly, when you do find, say, like, a street spot, but you gotta feed the meter. Some people still put coins in there. Some use their credit cards, but you kind of have to guess on the time. If you go too short, you could end up with a parking ticket. You go too long, well, no ticket. You're out of however much. It might just be some change, but it adds up over time. Well, did you know that there's actually a program that refunds you your leftover time on any downtown parking meters? That's right. There's an alternative payment method for when you want to have to feed that meter along the streets of the city of Charleston. It could absolutely save some of you some money. It's called the Smart Card. The Smart Card parking program takes whatever you have left. Um, left over when you decide to leave the meter, and you can actually put this card back in and it'll refund you the purchase. I actually used this a few years back, especially when I lived downtown. It was super helpful for when I couldn't find parking, or I wasn't around where I lived and had, was going to an event or something like that. It was great to be able to get that money back. So, in order to take advantage of those benefits, you have to purchase one of these smart cards from the city. There's a one-time $5 charge to do so, so not a big deal, just $5. To purchase those cards, you have to go to the City of Charleston's parking division, which is located at 180 Lockwood Drive, and it is in room 234 in Suite A, which is on the second floor. You can rewind that to get that. You can also, when you get there, just to let the people know when you walk in the doors what you're there for. They're happy to help you out. So yeah, it's basically like a gift card. You put money on it and put it in the meter, however much you want to do, and then you get that money back when you leave. You just got to put the card back in. So not too bad, right? And lastly, some more legislation. The South Carolina House passed a fentanyl crime bill. So, yes, House Republicans and a few Democrats passed legislation on February 1st to criminalize fentanyl trafficking, with supporters hailing the vote as an important step towards stopping the flow of the drug coming here into South Carolina. The bill was amended by a voice vote on the floor, which included what they wanted to add to it, which was mandatory minimum sentences. Now, some Democrats protested that, saying this could ensnare some addicts who really need treatment, not prison. So these minimum sentences are just based on how many grams of a mixture that contains fentanyl you're caught with. And obviously the more you have, the more likely you could be trafficking or selling to people. So the higher the sentence will be. So on the lower end, the minimum sentence is 14 years. On the high end, it's as many as 40 years. So a big swing, you know, depending again on how much you're caught with or how many offenses you have in the past. Now, House Minority Leader Todd Rutherford, he's a Democrat from Columbia. He argued that because like small amounts of fentanyl are typically mixed with other drugs without the buyer's knowledge, innocent addicts could be facing the same minimum sentence as those convicted of something like an armed robbery. This 14 years. So basically, he's saying, and we've heard this scary story, not that, you know, drugs are not scary on their own, especially certain types of them. But people who were purchasing, sometimes you hear cannabis, sometimes you hear cocaine. They're purchasing some other kind of drug, not knowing that fentanyl has been laced in there or mixed with it or whatever. Um, and so if someone gets caught with, something like that, still obviously in this state, both substances are illegal, but if it turns out there's some fentanyl somehow mixed in there and it's not, they didn't even know that, they're going to be going to prison for 14 years if convicted. That's the minimum sentence. So it seems that, that might be a little excessive for people like that who might just need some help in another area. So that's been the criticism of it. Although, of course, everyone wants to try to stop this, epidemic we're having with fentanyl and the deaths that it's, leading to. So we'll see how this legislation goes through. But right now, as I mentioned in the House, that did pass with those minimum sentences included. All right, that will do it for episode 80. Again, I hope you had a great week. I hope you have a safe and fun weekend or a nice, relaxing one if that's what you need. And thank you so much for listening. If you want to help support the show, go to patreon.com/Holy City Center. You can also go to holycitycenter.com/shop, pick up some merchandise. That helps out as well. Please rate and review this podcast. That'll help me get into more people's ears. And, if you leave a nice little review, it just makes me feel good as well. So please do. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes, especially since it's coming out 3 times a week now. Speaking of that, thanks to Lindsay Marie Collins, who has to edit all these episodes. She produces it through LMC Sound System while also producing other podcasts and running her own FMB Radio. Go check out that podcast when you get a chance, and also check out Tyler Boone's music. I already know you like it because you hear it in each and every episode. It's good music, so go listen to that. Until Monday, good night and good luck.